And we've had long conversations, and kind of glad it's over because they would go on into the night sometimes. But it's all worth it to see your faces and to be here and to present this kind of an idea. Even though I've written about race and Islam in all sorts of ways, my first book, Black Mecca, The African Muslims of Harlem, was a book that tried to understand how African immigrants into Harlem were negotiating what it meant to be black, to be of African descent, and to be Muslim. And it took me a while to even get there. I started being a fellow at the Smithsonian, trying to find this population where I could demonstrate how these three heritages work together, what the intersection, what the negotiation was about. I spent a year there and I couldn't find the right population. Ended up going back home to where I live now, Newark, New Jersey, not in Philadelphia, as where Temple University is located. So yeah, I do commute 100 miles to get to work. Fortunately, as professors, we don't work every day, right? We work twice a week or so. So end up in Harlem. A friend of mine suggested that we go to the Juma prayer. I hadn't been to Harlem in such a long time. I'm going there, and I'm seeing all these African brothers and sisters walking around in garb, in beautiful garb. And I'm like, well, how did this happen? And what's going on? I noticed then, I said, well, they're black immigrant. There's the blackness I'm looking for. They're from the continent, but they're also from Guinea, Cote d'Ivoire, and Senegal. So get three populations for the price of one. And then I discovered they were Muslim. And I was like, I spent all this time in Washington, D.C. at the Smithsonian for a year, and they were there all the time. That was euphoric for me, and it started my fieldwork journey. My ethnography started at that moment, and I began to try to observe, hang out with them until 3 o'clock in the morning, having the 11 o'clock class in the morning at Temple in Philadelphia. Would just sleep in Newark and just go through these kind of states, going through 3 states over 2 years after I signed my book contract with Oxford. That was quite a journey. I think I was younger then. Very much more ambitious than I am now. I don't think I would do that again. But again, I want to start by thanking Ellen McLarney for her vision, the invitation, of course, and her tenacity, but in particular, her courage. I think we don't see courage today as much as we should.
Yes, right.
Unfortunately, it's a thing of the past. As Mrs. Lincoln mentioned, the elders had real courage. If we could just get an inkling of that, I think our world would be different. Especially for those who are in leadership position. So I want to thank her for her foresight and for pulling this together. It's quite an adventure and quite a crucial topic for us to discuss. To Julie Maxwell, I want to thank you for all that you do. I think we don't realize how much goes into organizing events like this. And I'm also, as a curator, understand I've been on all sides of this, and I know how hard you work, so thank you. To the sponsors and all the participants, I applaud your generosity and supportive spirit. To Mrs. Lincoln for your honoring presence. As scholars, our spouses and our loved ones allow us to be who we are. And they allow us to do what we do. So I say to you sincerely, thank you. Distinguished colleagues and guests, thank you. Ma'am Wahid, thank you also for your vision and your work. I appreciate the opportunity to present a topic like this. This is the first time I'm actually exploring this topic with you, so I'm glad that you'll be on this journey with me. Someone actually mixed my pages up. That's okay. All right. Now, what I want to do today, and as I thought about the right way to talk about Islamic race, is to begin by looking at the idea of how race trumps religion, but also how religion qualifies what it means to be a racial person. I want to do that by looking at different time periods. And by that I mean, where have we been is where I want to start. I also want to move from there to where are we now, and then end with where are we going with all of this? And what does it mean to even think about Islam and race? So Bhagat Singh Thind, and if I can even see, yeah, here you go, right, had to negotiate a sense of his own, or a sense of the whiteness of the country and his religion. The Nationalization Act of 1790 in the US restricted citizenship to free white persons, but failed to define exactly what white is and who is white. So many people of Asian descent and others began petitioning the court, claiming that they were white by law. To begin, Bhagat Singh, an Indian immigrant, lost his Supreme Court petition in 1923 for all Indians to be classified as white, while the court declared that he possessed the quote-unquote plurality of Aryan blood. He could not be Caucasian in the common understanding of white persons. Thind was a follower of the Sikh religion, and this was a major issue for a country informed by both white Anglo-Saxon culture and Protestant religion. Tom Ellis was a Christian from Syria. For others, the court used religion or Christianity to identify the race of the applicant. Now, this is not a picture of Tom Ellis, but it is a picture of a Syrian restaurant in 1910. And this was the year he petitioned the court for his own citizenship and his own whiteness. In 1910, Tom Ellis, a Syrian, petitioned the court for citizenship as it was granted, and it was granted, but not before his Christianity was made clear. Quote, "The applicant is a Syrian," the judge says, "a native of the province of Palestine, a Maronite. It must be said further that he is reared a Catholic and is still of that faith." The judge went to such pains to mention at least 3 times that he's a Christian in all sorts of ways. And so the whiteness that he was not granted was given to him through religion itself. Now, for Ahmed Hassan, and of course I don't have an image of him, but this is the first page of his petition. He's a Muslim, and I call this part here, bad Muslim, better Muslim, because Ahmed Hassan actually was not granted his petition, even though he went to also great pains to prove that he was white, or could be white. During World War II, Ahmed Hassan, a Yemeni Muslim, applied for citizenship and was denied. On December 14th, 1942, Judge Arthur Tuttle declared, quote, "Arabs are not white persons within the meaning of the Nationality Act." Using Hassan's religion to determine his race, Judge Tuttle added, quote, "Apart from the dark skin of the Arabs, it is well known that they are a part of the Mohammedan world, and that a wide gulf separates their culture from that of the predominantly Christian peoples of Europe." Unquote. Finally, he stated, "It could not be expected as a class they would readily intermarry with our population and be assimilated into our civilization." something else. However, Hassan was well prepared to demonstrate his whiteness, with countless affidavits literally stuffed under his arm from ethnologists, stating that, quote, the Arabs are remote descendants of and therefore members of the Caucasian or white race, and that Hassan is therefore eligible for citizenship. Still, his petition was denied. Now, this next figure is Muhammad Muriz. Now, this is not Muhammad Muriz, but the Arabian Nights reflects a kind of Islamophilia in the country near the end of World War II. Right? You begin to have a different attitude towards the Middle East, Arabia, and relations were seen as improving. And so the court's decisions reflect that as well, right? So just 17 months later, this is after Hassan was denied his petition for citizenship and whiteness, an Arab from Arabia, Muhammad Muriz, applied for citizenship in 1944. Unlike Hassan, his petition is granted precisely because he is from the Muslim world, which now made him white. The court stated that, quote, the Arab passes muster as a white person. So Judge Charles Wyszynski ends by stating that quote, the need to promote friendlier relations between the United States and other nations, and so as to fulfill the promise that we shall treat all men as created equal. So in part one, we see examples of how someone from a kind of real non-Christian religion, Sikh religion, actually has to negotiate what it means to be not just white, but also within the Protestant tradition. Next, we see how even Christianity then can kind of racialize you, right? And by racializing you and giving you a sense of whiteness, it actually validates your petition to become a part of this society. And so part one, it clearly shows the slippery slope and how race and religion become strange bedfellows. And this complicates our discussion of the Islam and how Islam and race fit together or interact. Now, this is the manifest head of the Baltimore Afro-American. And so this particular issue is from 1902, but in 1932, the Baltimore Afro-American had a contest to decide what was the best name for people of African descent. They actually set out and petitioned African Americans throughout the country to come up with the best name for black people, right? They received over 6,000 replies. In 1932, that was pretty impressive. Most felt the label Negro indicated a non-mixed race and could foster racial pride and solidarity. Others felt the word colored spoke to the variety of experiences among people of African descent. Other terms were like American, Afro-American, black, Ethio-African, polynational, and even national. One member of the Moorish Science Temple, an Islamic group with 1913 roots in Newark, New Jersey, declared, quote, take off that slavery name Negro and give us our God-given name, Moorish American, and let us be men among men. Another Moorish Science member, Alec Brown Bay, refused to acknowledge the Negro designation on his draft form in 1942, which is when World War II occurred, right? Declaring that, quote, Moorish American was a divinely given name for him and for all Negroes, and to refuse it was a violation of God's command. Dawood Ahmed Faisal, as you can see here, he's situated in the middle, in the pointer work? Yeah. So this is Dawood Ahmed Faisal. And here he is here with Malcolm at the United Nations in 1963. And they seem to, as you can probably realize, they seem to be squaring off here, right? Look at Malcolm's face and look at Dawood Faisal looking up at him. But Dawood Faisal was an Afro-Grenadian Muslim who officially registered the Islamic Mission of America in Brooklyn in 1944. He traveled extensively promoting his message in his book, Al-Islam, the Religion of Humanity. He tailored his message for those who had grown up in the black church, assuring them that Islam was the authentic religion of the Prophet Abraham and all his descendants. Faisal urged African Americans to reject their status as Negroes by returning to their original religion and their sacred language of Arabic. He said, quote, "You are Muslims, not Negroes. There are no such people or nationality called Negro. Your nationality is the country of your birth. Return and worship the one true God in Islam. It will free you from the companionship of the devil, from sin and enslavement." In the world of jazz, something we will hear about later from my colleague, Dizzy Gillespie, the legendary trumpeter, band leader, composer, was unsure about the Islamic conversion of his fellow musicians in the 1940s and 50s. But he paid close attention to how everyday racism seemed to change for those in his band who claimed to be Muslim. Now, this is a picture of Dizzy, as you can see, in Pakistan in 1954. He was a part of the musicians as ambassadors. They were traveling around the world. The State Department had these jazz musicians traveling around the world to promote, to promote democracy. And he's in Pakistan, but he also went to other Muslim countries. Many of his handlers or his managers felt that he might be converting. This was an opportunity for them to gloat that, yeah, I think he wants to become a Muslim, or he will become a Muslim. But Dizzy begins, "Man, if you join the Muslim faith, you ain't colored no more. You'll be white. They say you get a new name and you don't have to be a nigger no more." They had no idea of black consciousness, he said. All they were trying to do was escape the stigma of being colored. When these cats found out that Idris Suleiman, who joined the Muslim faith about that time, could go into these white restaurants and bring out some sandwiches to give to the other guys because he wasn't colored, and he looked like the inside of a chimney, he was black. They started enrolling in droves. Of course, this is Idris Suleiman with Jamila, cover of his article. He goes on to say, Dizzy, musicians started having it printed up on their union cards where it said race, they had W for white. Kenny Clark has one and he showed it to me. He said, "See, nigga, I ain't no spook. I'm white with W." Another cat went into this restaurant and they said they didn't serve coloreds in there. He said, "I don't blame you. But I don't have to go under the rule of colored because my name is Mustafa Dalil." In the early 1960s, Dr. Sierra Lincoln and Malcolm X shared a friendship. And Lincoln's book, The Black Muslims in America, helped to establish the Nation of Islam as a legitimate religion in the mainstream. Still, Malcolm X and the Muslims in the nation objected to the term Black Muslim, which the media quickly embraced as a common reference to the group. Malcolm explained in his autobiography, quote, "The name Black Muslims distressed everyone in the nation. I tried for at least 2 years to kill off that Black Muslim. Every newspaper and magazine writer and microphone I got close to. No, Malcolm barked. We are black people in America. Our religion is Islam. We are properly called Muslim. But that Black Muslim name never got dislodged. In the early to mid-20th century, making the distinction between race and religion, or using Islam as a corrective to oppressive racial labels, reflected a dominant way of thinking for many people of African or Asian descent. So the third part here I want to cover is this notion of the Black Atlantic, and in particular, the notion of the Black Muslim Atlantic. The problem with Africanist naming, or names that people of African descent have chosen for themselves, is that they either relate to ideas of darkness or color, or otherness, a single black origin or a unique place in Africa or Asia. As previously mentioned, the name Negro was quite popular during the 1932 newspaper contest, but the word still means black, be it derived from Latin, French, or German. And the Arab use of the word Sudan for Africans also means black. The word Ethiopian, a popular term used in the early 20th century, derives from the Greek meaning burned face or black. Other words used to name black folks were Moor, referring to the people of North Africa, Blackamoor, Guinea, another place, Zinji or Zinj, related to Zanzibar, which also means black, and the Arabic bar means coast. So we have blacks of the coast. The origin of the term Africa itself is even less clear, though it appears to be either Latin or Greek, in which case it refers to a sunny place, a place with a lot of sun, or a place without cold. But this description says nothing about the people. The idea of a Black Muslim Atlantic comes from Paul Gilroy's The Black Atlantic, Modernity and Double Consciousness, and was published in 1993. In this work, Gilroy attempts to unravel a single story about the modern world and the role of black people, the role that black people played in creating it. But Gilroy was certainly not the first to write about this. And scholars like Cedric Robinson and his Black Marxism, the making of the Black radical tradition, studied it a decade earlier. At the same time, the idea of the Black Muslim Atlantic, or Black Atlantic Islam, was published by Mustafa Bayoumi, an English professor at Brooklyn College in 1999, in his review essay, Moorish Science, The Secret History of African American Islam. While this forum rightly applauds the popular use of the Black Muslim Atlantic as a concept used by Marguerite Aziza in her fight against anti-Black Muslim racism, Aziza is certainly not the first to use the term. Why does this matter? We must decide if this idea can be properly theorized. And at what level of theorization are we talking? Are we talking middle range theory, grand round theory? What? How the kinds of ways we think about ideas need to be useful for us as we evaluate what we think is going on. And not merely in oceanic usages of bodies of water like the Atlantic, the Pacific, or the Indian Ocean as ways to guide our thinking. The benefit of a Black Muslim Atlantic, though, or a Black Atlantic Islam idea, is that it forces us to better understand the role Muslims of African descent played in the cross-Atlantic exchanges and the making of a modern world. But if we take into account the huge presence of Black African slavery in the Middle East and in early Muslim world, as evidenced by the revolt of 500,000 Black slaves called the Zenj between the years 869 and 883, we will quickly realize the limitations of this model. For example, historians estimate that the trans-Saharan Arab slave trade exported at least as many Black Africans to North Africa, Europe, and the Middle East as did the transatlantic slave trade to the New World. This means that a framework around the Atlantic Ocean must be expanded if we are to learn from the comparisons inherent in what I call a Black Muslim globality. Last, Umar ibn Said, and you can see here, I couldn't resist placing, a younger brother who was actually sort of mimicking Umar ibn Said next to him in his image. That was just too delicious to pass on. So this is a good example of what we mean by the globality of Black Muslims. Umar ibn Said wrote a letter to a man named Yang from China, Canton, China. As many of you know, Umar ibn Said was a full Muslim from Senegal, enslaved in North Carolina in 1807. But he managed to write a number of Arabic manuscripts, including letters. Now, perhaps this will be covered later, but there are three aspects of this letter that are worth noting. First, besides the content of the letter, the geometric design is a brilliant form of global resistance and communication. Some believe the art is a talisman, like a localized spell or good luck formula from the Fulla of West Africa. And this certainly is one interpretation. However, if we understand the art history of geometric designs, there emerges another interpretation, and one in line with the worldwide reach of a letter meant for a Muslim member of the global Ummah. First, Ibn Khaldun, a 14th century historian and sociologist, described geometric art patterns as, quote, a noble science that could have cleansing effects on the minds of those who contemplate its forms, unquote. Beyond the personal healing effects of geometric patterns of Islamic art, all art is communication. And the structures are based on a circle of unity. If nothing else, the diagram communicates some sense of unity beyond the African continent, and the letter was directed to a Chinese Muslim named Yang. Second, geometric ornamentation in Islamic art creates the illusion of three-dimensional space, which forces the viewer to consider multiple perspectives. As many enslaved Africans sang the spirituals to send coded messages to one another, this geometric design is certainly multi-layered and coded. Perhaps the design is even a way to demonstrate that the letter is authentic. Third, come to an end. Third, the most intriguing part, the geometric art design typically adopts a borderless frame, which would indicate the infinite expandability of the design. That is, rather than the art being enclosed, as you can see here, the borders really are not enclosed, right? And they afford us to actually add more of the geometric designs, right? Either down, outward, upward, right? And so the kind of elasticity of the design was important because that related to the notion of freedom. So here's someone who's enslaved in North Carolina, writing someone in China with a geometric design like this that indicated freedom. In closing, when interpreting Black Muslim life in all of its formulations, locations, iterations, we must be careful not to reduce it to superstition or something magical because we don't understand what's going on. This feeds into the worst stereotypes about Black religion and hampers our ability to speak truth to power. I want to end with this image here of a young Black woman on what being a Muslim and the Muslim world is like. Being Black and Muslim means you are the largest group of American Muslims, but you are the last to be asked to speak on Islam.
That's right.
Thank you.